Welcome back to another episode of Northwoods Whitetails Podcast. I'm your host, Joey Davis. In this week's episode, I sat down with Timmy Bolduc and we discussed the Woodman Arms Muzzleloaders and the loads that go in them. Timmy has sent thousands of rounds downrange with these guns and has got them extremely dialed. Whether you guys are using Smokeless, Blackhorn, 45 caliber, 50 caliber. He has these things dialed, bullets, powder, you name it. And this is a very informative podcast for all of you that are running a Woodman Arms. Listen to this. There's something in there that each of you guys can take away. Number of grains used, etc. Bullet grains. It explains it all. Timmy does a fabulous job. So, without further ado, let's dive right into it. Tell me what you know about muzzleloader loads. What do you, for all these guys that are buying muzzleloaders, what do you recommend? 50 cal, 45 cal? Is there different loads between?
There is.
Blackhorn.
For Smokeless.
Smokeless.
Yeah. So I'll just list them right out. Okay, so the bulk of our sales are definitely going to be in 45. So probably most people listening to this are going to be getting a 45. If you want to shoot Smokeless, I'm going to give you a few different options, and then I'll tell you my favorite. You can also do Blackhorn with them. I am going to recommend the same bullet for both. The 250 grain Fury bullet that we sell is my favorite 45 cal bullet, and I've shot a lot. Like through the beginning of Woodman Arms, I was shooting power belts and a bunch of different bullets. It took a long time to find the right bullet, and what I mean by that is it was really difficult to find a 45 cal bullet that performed well on deer. So like my pump rifle, I use a Remington Core-Lock. You probably do too?
Same. Great
bullets, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get a pass-through with a Remington Core-Lock, when you find that thing, it's going to be in your hand, expanded, right? They just...
It's going to be mushroom.
Exactly. It took a long time to find a 45 cal bullet that would do that. In that 250 grain, that's my favorite thing about that bullet. That is a lead core, but it's a bonded bullet. I've shot bucks with it. People I know have shot bucks with it, and if you don't get a pass-through, you're going to dig that thing out, and it's going to be expanded. It's going to weigh 25, 30 grains less than when you shot it, but it's going to stay together, and that's why I push that bullet. The other reason I really like that bullet, it's just very accurate. It's an odd thing. Like that bullet, when you look at it, it's nothing special to look at, that star tip, but I will tell you, I shot a muzzleloader with Mark Woodman and Steve Ciampa one time. It was a bolt action, and we were trying a bunch of different bullets, and we were shooting bullets with polymer tips. Like, when you held those other bullets, you would swear just looking at it, like this is definitely going to be a more accurate bullet just because it was so aerodynamic and so, it just looked like, yeah, that's good. The best bullet we shot out of that gun that day, and we ramped that thing up, we were shooting 3,000 feet per second. With that gun, the best bullet, the most accurate bullet we shot was that 250 grain star tip. It was just, and like I said, when you look at it, you don't think it would be anything great, but I'm telling you, that bullet is just extremely accurate, and we put it to the test at 3,000 feet per second. Wow. That tells you the strength of that bullet. When you've got a charge going off behind that thing, with that amount of pressure, and for that bullet to not distort and do anything crazy where it starts getting inaccurate, says a lot about it. So anyways, the 250 grain is my favorite. You can also shoot the 225, but I like the 250, and I'll tell you why, is when you add more weight to so you got a 225, 45 grain. When you take that same bullet and make it 250, it gets longer. Longer bullets stabilize better. That's the ballistic coefficient that Mark talked about on the last podcast. And all that is just how it flies through the air. When you have a longer bullet, they stabilize really good. So anytime I've ever gotten any trouble with a Woodman that I couldn't get sighted in, if I just go up in weight in the exact same bullet, I will usually get a really good load. But most of the time, like I said, it's not so much adjusting my powder, it's going up in weight. And the reason is the ballistic ballistic coefficient gets better because the bullet's getting longer because you're going up in weight. And when you send that through the air, being long like that, it stabilizes really well. So that's why I like the 250. It's my favorite bullet, hands down. So I recommend it to everybody.
You guys make it?
Nope. We buy that bullet, and then the crushed rib sabot that it comes with, we buy those separately. So we pretty much buy the bullet, buy the sabots, and we just put them together. Yeah, and it's just, Mark always liked that crushed rib sabot, and we did shot a lot of different bullets to find that Fury bullet that I'm talking about, and it just happened to be the best one. So those two put together like I said, I can't emphasize enough. Don't waste your time trying to go find something different. Like, trust me, it's pretty much the best you're going to find.
You've shot this bullet 1,000
I've shot it so
times.
much. I've shot deer with it. And like I said, the performance of this bullet on deer is phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. So, that bullet. Now, if you've got a 45 cal and you want to shoot Blackhorn, let's start with Blackhorn. I always start, and these numbers that I'm going to give you are going to be 9 out of 10 of our barrels are going to like what I'm talking about, but you're going to get a barrel that might want a little bit different. So the starting load with Blackhorn is 100 grains by volume, not weight. It's by volume. And if you want to weigh it, go to Blackhorn's website. There's a conversion chart. 100 grains by volume equals, and I think it's like 72 grains or whatever it is on a scale. So you can weigh it. That's fine. But just go to that conversion chart. Don't weigh out 100 grains of Blackhorn because that's going to put you way over, right? But 100 grains, 9 out of 10 barrels love 100 grains. And I tell everybody to start right there, and all I do is just shoot 3-shot groups. I'll shoot 3 shots, really controlled, off a lead sled, do a good job shooting, squeeze your trigger, nice shooting, just do good shooting, and shoot a group with that. And most of the time, you, like at 50 yards or 70 yards, if you're a good shooter, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be cutting, all 3 of those shots are going to be touching. If they're not, if you've got like a 2-inch group at that range with 100 grains, go to 102. Then shoot another 3-shot group, go to 105. Keep working yourself up through, and all of a sudden one of those 3-shot groups is going to tighten right in, and you're going to be like 3 shots and, all touching. Once you get there, that's the load for your gun. And they're all a little bit different. It doesn't come out so much in Blackhorn, but in Smokeless, that's when you'll figure out that, like, each one is going to be a smidge different. So that's the Blackhorn load. That goes for a 50 cal. If you got a 50 cal, same thing, same load. Pick your bullet. There's a million good 50 cal bullets. We sell some, but I always tell people, like, we're really not trying to sell you bullets. Like, if you want to buy from us, great. But the good part about a 50 cal is every store you go into has 50 cals, and there's a million good manufacturers of 50 cal bullets out there. So if you want to just pick one, go ahead. If you're getting a 45, the problem is you're going to go to those stores and you're going to see there's no 45 cal bullets. Yep. So that's why we did what we did. It's almost like selling, a Corvette to somebody, but they don't have any gas, right? Yeah. So we're just providing the gas is all we're doing, right? Yep. So... Yep. So that's your Blackhorn loads, 100 grains, same thing with the 50. Just work yourself up through. If you've got to, again, 9 out of 10 of you guys are going to just shoot 100 grains like I'm telling you, and you're never going to leave that spot. It's going to just zero right in, and you're going to be like, yep, not touching it. And like my own personal tracking gun, it's 100 grains of Blackhorn with that 250 grain bullet. That's what I shoot.
Have you gone the other way at all? Have you shot like 90 to 100? 100 is a sweet spot.
100's a sweet spot. And the reason I don't go south of that, you've got to get enough speed behind the bullet for that thing to expand. If you get too light on your powder, you're not making it fast enough. So when that hits, it won't mushroom. It'll just go in.
Just penetrate.
Yeah. So 100 grains, that bullet's going to expand. Jace's deer, my son's deer, I lightened that load up. I never found that bullet, but I could tell from the entry and the exit, that bullet never expanded. It just shot right through, and it stayed a point the entire way. When you get to 100, that's fast enough that when you hit something with that it's going to expand. So it gives it enough speed to expand.
Yep.
So that's the Blackhorn loads, and that's the bullet. Now we'll go to Smokeless 45 because that's what most people buy, and that's definitely our most popular seller is going to be a 45. So 45, you got 3 choices. You can shoot H4198, not IMR. There's a lot of guys that call me up and they're like, "Oh, can I just get IMR?" And the answer is no. It's H4198, but the problem with H4198 is it's really difficult to get. Like, you just can't find it right now. So I shot that a bunch. It's a great powder. Never had any problems with it. I really like it. The other one, the equivalent to the H4198 would be Vitavore N120. Then you can also shoot Vitavore N110. And all these are is like the N110, the N120. These are just like burn rates. And I'm not going to pretend to understand why we're recommending that. It's as simple as this. Mark Woodman will just be like, "Hey, we're going to go shoot this gun, and we're shooting N110. He's the one that did all the research. He knows the burn rate. He knows with this length of barrel, with this specific burn rate, it's going to burn all the powder and not have, because sometimes, like, if you have a shot on snow, like if you put 120 grains of Blackhorn in one of these guns, shoot it on snow, and you'll have a little stream of unburnt powder out in the snow right there, and you're just not burning it all. So you have to get the correct burn rates to make sure you burn the entire charge before the bullet comes out of the muzzle, right? And like I said, you can put too much Blackhorn where you're actually not even burning the 120 grains. You're actually only burning 100 or 110, and the other 10 is just in the dirt out in front of you. It never gets burned. So N110, N120, and then H4198. Now, H4198 and N120, those two are very similar to each other. The magic load that I found, kind of like in Blackhorn, is 100 grains. The magic load for those two, H4198 and N120, is 57 grains by weight. And to be clear, I just want to get this on record that whenever you're shooting smokeless, weigh it. It's never by volume. You don't want to pour into and measure anything with smokeless by volume, because you'll see when you have these different powders, the grain sizes of these powders is very different. So if I took N110 and tried to pour it into, let's just call it 50 grains, poured it in, if you poured that out on a scale and then did the same thing with N120, they're going to weigh different, because N120 is a lot finer particles than N110. So you don't get the same amount of volume, so I feel like smokeless is so rowdy because it creates so much pressure. You got to be very detailed and like be precise on weighing it. So you always want to weigh it. So N120 and H4198, the optimal load seems to be 57 grains by weight. Almost every single one of these guns that I've shot, I've landed right there at 57. That's the most accurate load. With that specific load in the bullet that I'm talking about, you're going to be right around 2,400 feet per second at the muzzle, which is pretty fast. That's fast for a muzzleloader. But the way I do it, so if somebody buys one of these guns and you want to shoot either one of those two, N120 or H4198, don't go right to 57. Start at 55 grains, shoot a 3-shot group. It's probably going to be this big. Go to 55 and a half, shoot a 3-shot group, 56, 56 and a half, and just keep working yourself up through. And when that group, and it's crazy, but these things are so accurate that when you get that right, it literally goes from this to that in 3.
Shrinks it right down.
It just, you'll know it. It's like no question when you find it. When you land on that load, I'm telling you, there will be no doubt in your mind, like, that's the load. And once you have it, once you find that load, that's the load for the life of that gun. Like, that's the load for your barrel. And again, they're very, very similar, but I have definitely shot barrels that didn't like 57 grains and just was a tack driver with 56. That's just what that barrel wanted, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the N120 and the H4198 load. And I would stop somewhere. I wouldn't go a whole lot more than like 60 grains, 61. Somewhere in there. Now you're creating a lot of pressure, and our gun will handle that, but you're creating a lot of pressure when you get up that much with that kind of powder, with that specific powder. It's getting a little bit too rowdy, Mm-hmm. So I definitely would stay, like I said, end at 60. But again, from 55 to 60, if you're a good shooter, I will guarantee you somewhere in there on your way through, you're going to land on the load. And once you find it, just stop there. So those two powders are really good, and I really like those powders. But I did try N110. the day that I met with Travis and those guys, and we shot you guys' gun. I'm in love with N110. I really, really like it. And there's a couple reasons. So what I figured out about N120, remember I was just saying how fine that powder is? When Mark went to Huntstock, New York, they had a range down there and they wanted to shoot Woodman Arms at that range. So Mark ended up shooting out of that gun. It was N120 he was shooting. And he shot, I think before the weekend was over, it was like 250 rounds went through that gun. Okay, so he loaded that gun and it got shot 250 times. We got the gun home and I took it out of the case to put it away and I broke the action open and I could feel something wasn't. I was like, man, what the heck's wrong with that? And Mark's like, what? And I was like, feel that. And he did. And he was like, huh. So we just unscrewed the trigger real quick, popped the pin and pulled the trigger out. And what it was, those powder pellets were so fine that they actually, when you loaded them, they were traveling through the flash hole in the breech plug. They actually were so fine that they were going through that. And on a Woodman, when it comes through the breech plug like that and comes through the pocket where the primer sits, once you stand the gun up, the only place it has to go is down, and it was into the trigger mechanism. So when we pulled that trigger out, there was all these little grains of N120 laying everywhere. And I was like, that's going to be a problem. Like, you know what I mean? If somebody shoots a lot and you get a bunch of these little fine grains inside that trigger, I was like, that's going to be a problem. So before I keep going, we actually addressed the problem because Mark ended up taking one of those grains and he measured it. And we've since made a breech plug that has a tighter flash hole. Now that powder won't come through. It won't make it through. And I went and tested it this past weekend. I shot on Sunday with Mark and we tested it and it shot perfect. No problem at all. So we did tighten up that hole. But the N110, I just poured some of that in my hand and I looked and that stuff is a lot bigger grains. So that stuff won't come through your breech plug hole at all. So, and then the other thing that I learned about N110 was it's a weird deal and I honestly can't explain why, but when you listen to that stuff go off compared to H4198 or N120, like the report you hear, the bang, is very different. And I don't understand why, but it's definitely different. And even the recoil. Like,
it's more of a pop?
It's like a pop. It's like this real sharp, fast pop. And then the recoil, like with Blackhorn, with a 250 grain bullet, like 100 grains of Blackhorn, like that gun kicks. Dude, that N110, it's wild, but it feels like the recoil is like cut in half. And like I said, you can hear it when it goes off. Like it's just different. I don't know how to describe it, but it's this really fast, quick pop. And then that's it. And the recoil is like very minimal. But anyway, so I'm in love with the N110 right now because it's not going to go through the breech plug. And the stuff, what I like about it is with that specific powder, it's 40 grains seems to be the magic load. So we did them together, the N120 and the N110, and we wanted both to get to 2,400 feet per second at the muzzle. So it was 57 grains of N120, but it's only 40 grains of N110. So it won't go through the breech plug hole, but it's also all you got to use is 40 grains of it. So you're using a lot less of it, so your bottle goes a lot longer because it's only 40 grains. But we chronographed it, and it was like 2390 at the muzzle with only 40 grains. And I've shot 2 or 3 since and set them up with N110, and both guns I landed right at 40 grains. So 40 grains just seems to be like that money load for N110 with that 250 grain bullet. So if you handed me one right now, like, Timmy, go sight this gun in, I'm going to probably pour in 40 grains and with that 250 grain bullet, and chances are that thing is going to be a tack driver with that load.
What's your optimal distance? What are you sighting that thing in at, 75 yards?
So it depends on how you want to do it. So if you're putting a scope on this gun, I'm going to tell you the magic spot to sight it in to zero it. So let's say you're shooting those smokeless loads 2,400 feet per second with a 24-inch long barrel, which is our standard gun. I've shot those guns at 250 yards. I can get them to group at 250, okay? What we figured out is 150 yards zeroed is the best. And what happens is at at 150 yards, now come back to the gun. At 50 yards, that thing's going to be a bullseye. At 100 yards, you're going to be about 1.5 inches high. At 150, you're back to a bullseye because the bullet comes out, goes above, and then starts dropping, right? So you got the plane of your scope like this, or the plane of the barrel. When the bullet comes out, it actually rises like this right here. That's your 50. And then at 100, that's at the peak. Then at 150, it's right back on. And then what happens is at 200 yards, you only end up having to hold probably, I'd say, depending on your load, but roughly 4 inches high. So anything 200 yards all the way back to me, you can literally hold on brown and you'll get it. But the problem is when you zero at like 100 yards, that 200-yard hold becomes way different. And even like come back to 50 yards, it's not on. You see what I mean? Because that arc isn't right. So 150 yards. And because 150 and 50 are the same, I just usually zeroed at 50 yards. Then I'll go to 150. It'll be right on. Then go shoot it at 100. You're that much high. Yeah. And then 200 yards. Like I said, you only got that much of a hold. So
that's perfect.
It's like the perfect way. And I like having a gun on at 50 yards because what if it's closed? Like I don't want to have...
Most of what we shoot is close.
Right? And I don't want to have to think about that. I don't want to have to think like, oh, I got to hold low, I got to hold high, or any of that. Yeah. I just want to put it where I want it. And when you zero it, like I just said, that's what happens right there. It's like the perfect spot is 150 yards. Zeroed at 150, and then again, you're good at 50 yards. Just hold on. You might be that much high at 100.
Yep.
Right back on, and then you're 200 yard. Like if he's running and you're gonna try it, you could literally just be on him and you're gonna get him.
That's perfect.
So
that's good.
Yeah,
that's good info. Let me ask you this: the end of it. What are you cleaning these guns with?
You want the truth? I don't clean my gun. I haven't cleaned my gun in like 4 years. If you are gonna clean it, Hoppy's number 9 is probably what I would use. And that's like if you're shooting Blackhorn, it definitely gets dirty. I don't clean my gun, but I am going to say this. The reason I don't have any problem and my gun doesn't rust or anything, I have it in a safe, not in my basement. So if you're going to not clean it, you have to store it in a controlled climate, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't have it like a safe in your basement where there's any moisture, anything like that. You can't have any moisture because it will. I've seen a couple barrels pit, and it's because they were left dirty, but then stored in a moist climate, right? So my safe is upstairs, so it's always really dry, and I haven't cleaned my gun in, like I said, 4 years. I haven't had not one swab in that barrel in 4 years, but the reason I get away with it, like I said, is because of that. But if you do want to clean it, I use Hoppy's. Okay. Hoppy's number 9.
Okay.
Yep, and I just take my breech plug out, send it through, and here's a little trick. If you are going to do it, take your breech plug out, go in your breech end, and send everything out the muzzle, and then come back and go back through. And the reason is if you go the other way, you're going to, in the threads of screwing your breech in, you're going to fill that with a bunch of crud and stuff. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Just send it out the muzzle, flip your patch, send it out your muzzle again.
Perfect.
So that's what I do when I do.
Sounds good. That's pretty informative.
Smokeless, you'll see. Like if you guys are going to shoot smokeless, go ahead and shoot 5 shots and then look up in your barrel. It's going to look like you just bought it. It's like so clean. It is so clean. Yeah. You don't have to do anything. So
awesome.
Yep.
What's your take on you're hunting all day, cold, shitty out, maybe it's a little damp. You bring the gun back into the truck. Do you bring it inside to camp to let it dry out?
Yep.
You do.
I do. So this is another thing that I do. I tape the end of my barrel. Mm-hmm. I use black electrical tape. I go make a cross, go up and over, and then I do one wrap around the barrel to hold that tape down so it doesn't peel off or anything like that. If you do that right there, you literally can hunt with the thing all season. I don't care what you hunt in. I have put this thing to the test. I've been on buck tracks on days, and then at the end of the day, like if there was ever a time like this thing should misfire, this is it right here. Like I did it today. I've had that gun so covered in ice, and I mean just if there was a time where it was going to misfire, this is it. That was the time. Right here. You snap that thing up and it goes right off. One time I did have my Woodman, and it didn't misfire. It fired, but I'll explain what happened in a minute, but I had hunted the day before. I tracked a buck up on a mountain. There was snow everywhere, and I didn't have my barrel taped. So throughout the course of the day, I had gotten a bunch of, snow and moisture that had gotten into the barrel because it wasn't taped. So I got back to my truck, went back to camp, brought it inside, leaned it up against the wall, got up the next morning, put a primer in. When I got down to the place, I climbed right back up on that mountain, picked up a buck track, tracked him down, and snapped up to take a shot at him. And when I did, I touched it off, and I remember, it was the oddest thing, but I remember sitting there, and I remember looking at the gun, and I remember thinking to myself, if somebody was standing here right now and bet me $50, did that gun fire or not? I couldn't have told you. Like, I didn't know if it went off. Like, I heard something, but I felt no recoil. I didn't know if the primer just went off or what. Like, I literally did not know. So I take the gun, crack it open, pop the primer out, and I looked up through the breech plug, and I saw daylight. And I was like, well, it fired. And I'm like, what the heck happened? And I'll tell you what happened. The day before, I'd gotten all that moisture in the barrel, and when I went back to camp and leaned it up against the wall, all that moisture had gone down to the bullet, sat there, snuck around in the rifle and snuck around my bullet. I had 100 grains of Blackhorn underneath of it. It soaked 80 of it, but the 20 grains down by my primer was dry. So when I touched that off, it was only that 20 grains that actually went off. And that bullet bounced off that buck probably.
That's all you got?
Yeah, exactly. And I was that right there that day. That's when I learned. After that happened, and I figured that out. I was like, the only way you're going to get this gun to misfire, it's going to come from the muzzle.
Yep.
It's going to be moisture from the muzzle, because the action of that gun, you see, it's pretty sealed up. Mm-hmm. And I've put it to the test, and it's not going to misfire from getting moisture back by your primer. It's going to be if you allow it to come and get around the rifle and around your bullet and get to your powder. So just tape it.
Just tape it.
I shot a buck a few years ago at 230 yards with my 40 cal with a taped muzzle. And I mean, that's a poke. For me, it is. That's a long shot, right?
Yeah, that is a long shot.
Yep. It does not affect the accuracy. No problem. Just shoot right through the tape. So when I go shoot my gun before the season, I load it up for tomorrow's opening day. I load it up, tape the end of my muzzle, and I hunt all season long. I don't unload it. You
don't worry about it.
I do nothing. I do absolutely nothing.
That's good. What kind of primers you running? So
right now, I shot Remington STSs for years. Those are a really good primer, but right now I'm shooting Cheddite primers. And Cheddites are actually the only one that I found. I don't know, maybe there's others out there. I don't think there is, but it's the only waterproof primer I've ever found. So if you look at a Cheddite primer on the back side, not the side that the firing pin hits, the side where the flame comes out, if you look, there's a dab of red epoxy they put over that, and it makes it waterproof. And I actually think it works, and I'll tell you why I think it works. So I had probably 2 different guys through the last 2 years that were on buck tracks or hunting and fell in rivers. They were crossing rivers and they fell in the water, and the gun went to the bottom of the river, and they picked it up. And I remember when these guys called me to tell me, they were like, dude, I was so impressed because the gun still fired. And I thought to myself, that's pretty good. A gun can be dropped to the bottom of a river underwater for 10 seconds, however long it is, and you can pull it out and that gun will still fire. I was like, that's pretty good. So it got me thinking anyways. So this past winter, I wanted to see how long it would last underwater. So I got a big, huge, giant Yeti cooler that's big enough to hold the gun, and I filled it up with water, brought it over to the pit, and we set the water out, and I had a Blem gun I built at the shop because I knew I was going to be dunking this thing in water. So I just built a junky one, took a bunch of spare parts and just built a junky one. It was a 50 cal. And anyways, we went over there that day, and I loaded it up with Blackhorn, 100 grains of Blackhorn. I picked one of our 50-grain bullets, just a normal saboted bullet. I did not tape the end of the muzzle, and I was using Cheddite primers. Put it in there, let it sit for 30 seconds, pulled it out, clicked the safety off, boom, fires off. So I'm like, okay, let's try a minute. So we went to a minute. I did a minute and a half. 2 minutes, and I just kept working myself up through, and I ended up at 15 minutes. That gun sat underwater for 15 minutes straight with no tape over the muzzle, just loaded with a primer in it. 15 minutes underwater, and I pulled it out, and it fired, no problem.
Wow.
And it was in the end of winter, and I was so cold from like doing so many shots, and I was just freezing cold, and I was like, that's it, no more. But we made it 15 minutes, and I would not be a bit surprised if that gun could sit underwater for 20, 25. It might go 30 minutes. I have no idea. But that gun can be submerged underwater for that long and pull it out, and it'll fire right off. But that day I did that, I was using Cheddite primers, and I thought about it after, and I'm like, I'm not so sure that would have worked and made it that long if I was using a normal primer. And I'm going to have to probably test that sometime to see if the primer, because I know you can get a primer wet, right?
Yep.
And that was with Cheddite primers. And once I saw how long that lasted submerged underwater, whether it's, I don't know if it's our gun and the water just never had a chance to get to the powder. I don't know what it was, but I know there was probably a really good chance that that primer is what made that possible.
That's awesome.
So Cheddite primers is what I'm into now.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And
Super
also, real
informative.
quick before we stop, any of the 50 cal guys, I haven't personally shot Smokeless out of a 50 yet. I will. But I talked to Mark just to find out because I knew we were going to be doing this, and it's going to be N130. So there's N110, N120. Those are for your 45s. N130, Mark said, that's going to be a good powder for your 50 cal.
Awesome.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Timmy.
it's no problem at all. No
All right.
problem.
No one can save you. You better run.